20 minutes of education.
We're so used to many things that seem obvious in our daily lives, like buying things with money, showing a passport when crossing borders, picking up a paid package at the post office, or at the cashier in the supermarket when buying wine or something stronger. But if you stop and think, why do we all have some kind of book or a card that identifies us? What's the historical background? Why do different countries have different passports, some of which are considered strong, meaning you can easily enter nearly any country in the world with them, while others are much less valuable? Let's dig into this in the first episode of 20 Minutes of Education. Let's start with the origin of the word itself. Passport comes from the Italian passaporto. Porto means port, a term that everyone knows. It's a certain area, a harbor by the sea or a river, meant for receiving ships. And pass means passage, like in boarding pass, the flight ticket, a way to go through. So literally, passaporto from Italian means to pass the harbor, or to go through the gates. Most likely the term passport came from a document required by some medieval Italian states, Venice, Florence, etc., for people to pass through a physical harbor, or the gates of the walled city or jurisdiction. Italy's favorable location at the center of the Mediterranean turned its large ports into centers for trade between the West and the East, where merchants, bankers, and entrepreneurs played a significant role in this. But who needed these passports and who didn't? Those documents were issued by local authorities to foreign travelers, not to local citizens, as is common in the modern world, where each country issues passports only to its own citizens, not to foreign tourists. Medieval passports for foreign travelers usually listed the cities the holder was allowed to visit or pass through. In general, documents weren't required for travel to seaports, which were considered open trading points, but they were necessary for passing through port control and traveling deeper into the country's inland ports. But long before Italian ports, where the word passport came from, the concept of the travel document with similar functions to today's passports existed even before Common Era. A remarkably progressive king of Persia, Artaxerxes I, issued travel permits for travelers. Those documents offered protection to those traveling within the Persian Empire. This happened in Persia, which is modern-day Iran. During the Achaemenid Empire, it was around 500 years BC. How can you not call this king progressive? Clearly, Artaxerxes I was reading some motivational literature, working on his mindset, and was definitely ahead of his time. Those documents were issued to officials, merchants, and travelers. In ancient India, there were also early forms of travel documents, although they weren't as formalized as modern passports, obviously. The Puranas, which are Hindu religious texts, and epic texts such as Mahabharata and Ramayana, mention recommendation letters or special tokens used by royal emissaries during their travels to foreign lands. By the way, emissaries, from Latin emissarius, an envoy or representative. They were official representatives of the state, like political organizations or intelligence services, sent to another country for various tasks, mostly secretive. But to be honest, the usual couriers of that time also used those letters and tokens. During the Maurya and Gupta empires, from the 3rd century before Common Era to the 6th century Common Era, royal decrees were likely issued to diplomats and merchants, allowing them to pass through various territories, especially those traveling for trade or cultural exchange. How did first passport look on the territory of Ukraine? Let's start, of course, with Kyivan Rus, which was the first Slavic state on the territory of modern Kiev, Ukraine. The very first passports here, and as I'm filming this video in Kyiv right now, I can confidently say here, not there, because everything that happened in Kyivan Rus literally happened here, just like 10-12 centuries ago. Actually, it's pretty cool to realize that. So, passports. Passports in Kyivan Rus were very different from the ones we're used to showing at the supermarket register. Obviously, they didn't have plastic printed ID cards. But what did they use instead? In Kyivan Rus, a kind of a passport or ID was a belt. By its ornament, you could tell which region the person came from and how old they were. Men wore white long belts, while women wore narrower, more delicate, and brightly colored ones. Moreover, having no belt back then was considered just as unacceptable as not having a passport today. In fact, in Kyivan Rus, going without a belt was seen as a huge sin for both men and women. When a baby was baptized, they would be belted or tied with a thread. As the child grew, the thread would expand, gradually turning into a belt. Another interesting function of those belts, passports, was that by looking at where the belt was worn, you could tell what the person did for a living, their profession. For example, craftsmen wore headbands. Such belts told us that their life's work was in craftsmanship. The set belt consisting of buckle, fittings, belt ends, rings, and loops was considered an element of the warrior culture, meaning it was worn by men who were part of the drużyna, a group of warriors or soldiers. Women wore woven or knitted belts. The decoration of the belt depended on the social status of its owner. Princes had gold belts, sometimes adorned with precious stones. This is like having a passport from Singapore or Japan in today's world. It opens doors everywhere with a very little effort. We'll come back to the strongest and weakest passports in the world later and see who has visa-free access to nearly all countries and who is struggling to enter the global stage. But let's wrap up our thoughts on the belt passports of Kyivan Rus. It turns out our modern passports seem to pale in comparison to medieval ones, because those belt passports also had practical uses. Firstly, they kept the clothing in place. And secondly, people would hang small everyday items like knives, flings, wallets, and leather pouches on them, like literally on them. Imagine attaching a knife to your plastic ID card and carrying that around with you. Not really cool, right? What about European passports in the old days? In medieval Europe, rulers issued letters of safe conduct, or patent letters, essentially passes that granted permission for someone to travel within or across certain territories for a specific purpose. Sounds familiar, right? Functionally, this was very much like a visa. There was a clear purpose, and because of that, travel was permitted. Those safe conduct passes were given to nobles, pilgrims, and merchants traveling across borders. These letters allowed travelers to move through different regions without facing unnecessary hostility or obstacles. The authority to issue such a document was with the monarchs or local authorities, kind of a transit business travel permit, for identification and differentiation, to distinguish who was an enemy and who was an ally. Medieval Europeans also used heraldic symbols, coats of arms. These were passed down through the male line. A knight wearing armor with a lowered visor couldn't be recognized without these heraldic symbols. By the way, a visor is the movable part of a helmet that covers the face for protection from blows. Clear, colorful symbols were written on shields and could also be seen on cloaks. The first prototypes of modern passports appeared in Europe during the Renaissance. In the 14th–16th centuries, many governments started issuing written certificates to certain individuals that included their names and occupations. In fact, a kind of a COVID certificate trend existed as early as the 14th–16th centuries. During epidemics, travelers' passports would also include information about their health. This practice was also common during wartime, which resembles modern military tags, containing basic medical information. These tags have been a simple and reliable way to identify a military person for over a century, containing blood type information and sometimes even details about vaccinations. By the way, I'd love to make an episode on military identification. Tell me, would you be interested in exploring more about how it worked in different times and during various wars around the world? Please write your answers in the comments. In those days, passports could even note someone's behavior. By the 16th century, as European countries began exploring and trading worldwide, documents called passports became more widespread, especially for traders and diplomats. During Napoleon Bonaparte's regime in the late 18th to early 19th century, significant steps were taken toward the creation of a modern passport system. Under his rule, France required its citizens to carry internal travel documents, and Napoleon is often credited as being a major influence in shaping the standardized passport format. After Napoleon's fall, many European countries began to standardize passport systems. In the 19th century, with the rise of railway networks and steamships, international travel became more accessible, which increased the need for standardized travel documents. In Asia, the widespread adoption of passports was largely influenced by European colonization. Many modern Asian countries were European colonies at that time, and had no choice but to adopt the rules set by the colonizers. There was also some influence from the Ottoman Empire, which controlled significant parts of the Middle East and also Central Asia. In the 19th century, the Ottomans issued travel documents as well. Regarding India, when it was under British rule in 1858, the British introduced a formal passport system for Indian citizens, mainly for those traveling to and from British territories. In feudal Japan, travel was strictly regulated by the shogunate, the government of the shogun. People traveling within Japan had to carry mizukiri, official travel permits, especially samurai, or those on official state business. The formalization of Japan's passport system occurred only in the early 20th century, as a part of modernization under King Rama V. In Indonesia, when the Dutch were colonial rulers, they introduced travel documentation to both Dutch citizens and indigenous people, although the system mainly served the colonial administration and trade. China officially adopted the passport system in the 20th century, initially influenced by European models, especially after the fall of the Qing dynasty and the formation of the Republic of China. The system developed further after the creation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. After gaining independence from Britain in 1947, India developed its own passport system based on the British model, but modified to suit its national interests. Just for contrast, the first official ID document in the Soviet Union wasn't a passport, but a workbook that tied workers to their workplaces. With these books, workers were issued ration cards for food. Sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? It was as if without a state-approved job, you were nobody. In 1932, the Soviet Union introduced a passport system along with mandatory registration at the place of residence. This Soviet relic still lingers today in some parts of the post-Soviet space, including Ukraine, unfortunately. Though the progressive world doesn't understand the concept of being registered at a specific place where you might not even live. It would be great to optimize life and completely get rid of this concept of registration. But let's go back to Europe for a bit, because the thing we all know so well appeared there, the one that many people think is impossible to look good in, the passport photo. It wasn't always like that. The idea was invented in the end of the 19th century. The invention of photography revolutionized the way passports were issued. Before the arrival of cameras, a person's appearance in passport was described in words. Yes, that's right. They literally wrote down what you looked like. Imagine, a passport would say, Napoleon. Well, he's a decent-looking guy. Yeah, a bit short, but charismatic. He also has hazel eyes. In the 1860s, passport photos became a common addition which made identification more reliable. At this point, the use of imagination in passport descriptions began to fade. And hey, some people say it was TikTok that ruined this, but it actually started when people stopped trying to imagine someone based on their physical description in a passport. Then, in the 1890s, the United Kingdom and other European countries started requiring photos in passport. It became mandatory, marking a major technological leap that made passports more secure and harder to fake, that we've all seen movies. Harder to fake, it's still not impossible to fake, right? Then they introduced something else to simplify and harmonize border control between countries: international agreements and conventions, aimed at standardizing passport issuance and rules. In 1920, the League of Nations created the first international agreement on passport standardization. Fast forward to 1944, the International Civil Aviation Organization played a key role in standardizing passport formats for international travel and set guidelines for passport issuance, including biometric data usage, fingerprints, and facial recognition, at the end of the 20s and early 21st centuries. But what does the biometric or electronic passport look like technically inside? It's a traditional passport with a built-in electronic microprocessor that stores biometric information, which can be used for identifying the passport holder. It uses contactless smart card technology with a microprocessor chip and antenna for both powering the chip and communication, embedded in the front or back cover or the central page of the passport. Important passport info is printed on the data page, repeated in machine-readable lines, and stored in the chip. In 2006, the European Union started issuing biometric passports, and these soon became the global standard as technology improved. Today, European passports are among the most secure in the world. The chip used to store biometric data includes at least 32 kilobytes of memory, which is actually not a lot. In independent Ukraine, the citizen's passport was introduced in 1993 by a decree from the Ukrainian parliament. The passport booklet had 16 pages, and the person's information was written by hand. Yes, handwritten. The passport officer would literally write details with a regular pen. Like, imagine how much responsibility that entailed. This internal passports in booklet form existed until 2016, after which they were replaced with ID cards. It is a plastic card made of multi-layered polymer material, polycarbonate. The card size is about 8.5 centimeters in length, which is the ID1 format. So, is there such thing as an internal and external passport, like in Ukraine, for instance? Yes, in some countries, in addition to the passport uses for crossing international borders, which is like international passport, there is also an internal passport, which is an ID card used within the country. This is common in countries with authoritarian or totalitarian regimes. In Ukraine, while we are a democracy, this relic still exists. Why is it just a relic? Because our internal passport doesn't serve the function of the passport in the historical sense, to pass port, as I mentioned, passage through the port. But with our internal passport, we can't cross the border because for 99% of countries, this document doesn't have any legal function. Basically, it's just used for identification within the country. In countries where they don't have this relic but have only one passport that lets you travel abroad, you can also use your driver's license for ID in certain situations, like at the counter or post office, which just like we do in Ukraine. But for us, it's just one more option for what document to show. In fact, it's just a bureaucratic leftover from the Soviet Union. Today, internal passports are still used in countries like China, Vietnam, and North Korea, where they are used to control citizens' movements within the country and restrict internal migration and residence locations. Another cool aspect of passports around the world is their influence, or in other words, their power. Passports aren't just casually called influential or powerful. There is actually a specific ranking created to measure this, called the Hanley Passport Index. It's a quarterly ranking of the most powerful passports in the world, and it's been around for 18 years. It's updated using data from the International Air Transport Association. The list is based on the number of countries that passport holders can enter without needing any special international documents, meaning without visas or any permits. So in our world, there are 195 independent countries. Who can travel to 194 of them without visa, and who can barely go anywhere? For example, Japan is at the top of the list. Japan, with its very advanced economy, cutting-edge technology, and strong cultural influence, has a passport that allows its citizens to visit 194 countries without needing a visa. This is a result of their strong diplomatic relations with many nations, which boosts the prestige of their passport. Singapore also has the same benefit with its passport, which opens doors to 194 countries. Singapore is known for its robust economy and is a global financial center. It puts a lot of effort into strengthening its passports. Now, when it comes to Europe, French, Spanish, Italian, and German passport holders also have access to 194 countries without a visa. These countries are not only prestigious and attractive for tourism and business, but also play significant roles in global diplomacy and trade. Moving on to countries with passports that allow access to 193 countries: Finland, the Netherlands, South Korea, and Sweden all fall into this category. Finland is known for its stable economy and high quality of life, making its passport highly respected. Sweden also has a strong passport due to its progressive social standards and high living standards. The Netherlands consistently ranks at the top due to its international humanitarian programs, strong economy, and quality of life. Of course. South Korea is also rising in power because of its technological, cultural, and diplomatic influence. And also, they invest a lot of money into prestige of their passports. So we can see that in countries with already high standards of living, the government also works on providing citizens with more freedom by making travel easier. It's really sweet. Ukrainian passport confidently holds the 31st place, which places it in the middle of the rankings and shows how much stronger it's become. Right now, Ukrainians can freely visit 148 countries. Ukraine has moved ahead of countries like Serbia, Albania, Georgia, Turkey, and even China in the rankings. You're probably wondering which countries have the weakest passports. Let's dive into that. The weakest passports are from North Korea, easy access to 42 countries, Palestine 41, Libya and Nepal 40 countries, Somalia 36 countries, Yemen 35, Pakistan 34, Iraq 31. And the country with the weakest passport, according to this globally recognized ranking, is Syria. Syrian passport holders can only visit 29 countries without a visa. This is mainly due to the country's weak economy, ongoing wars, and unstable international reputation. And which country offers the easiest citizenship? Let me tell you about 3 countries where getting a passport is relatively easy. Let's start with Monaco. To get citizenship there, you'll need things like a certificate of no criminal record, bank statements, or proof of marriage to a Monaco citizen. You don't need a mountain of paperwork or a ton of money. What's important is proving you'll integrate well into the local society, like knowing French or having a job in Monaco. Next is Norway, with its cute Scandinavian rules. If you peacefully live in the country for several years, are over 18, and have no outstanding alimony debts, you can apply for citizenship. Even though Norway formally doesn't allow dual citizenship, they do make exceptions if needed. And last but not least, Belize. Getting citizenship in Belize can take just 3 weeks, which is really fast. The first step is paying $44,000 to the Belize Economic Development Fund, like an investment in your passport. And if you pay $15,000 more, your entire family gets citizenship too. A great deal! And to wrap this up, let's talk about money a little more. The cost of passports around the world. How much do you pay as a citizen to get your passport? In Ukraine, an international passport costs between $23 to $38, depending on how fast you'll get it. Studies show the most expensive passport is from Australia, which costs $230 for a 10-year passport. Mexico is second, with the passport costing $170. Switzerland comes in third at $140. The United States charges $130, while UK charges $100. On the other end of the list, the country with the cheapest passport is the Czech Republic, which charges only $27. Latvia and Spain are also very affordable, costing $29 and $33. So, the modern passport is the result of centuries of development and innovation. Passports, along with their historical predecessors, have always served as tools for controlling international travel. While modern passports may look different, they continue to serve their main purpose as tools for border control and travel. I hope you found this interesting, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. After all, we all share at least one common thing: a passport. So let's make life nicer by supporting each other. Please share what surprised you the most, or which country's passport you'd like to have and why. Feel free to share any other thoughts or suggestions in the comments. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the chance to learn something new. See you!